we'd like to welcome Mr. Ford, who will be joining us today to talk a little bit about some of the issues that Native American voters might face and are interested in wondering and learning about each of our candidates. So we appreciate you joining us today. As we get started, we'd like to give you an opportunity to simply introduce yourself and what district you're running for. And maybe start us off with some opening words, and then we can jump right into some questions from our panelists. Thank you.
All right. My name is Mike Ford. I'm running in the 9th District of Georgia for Congress. I'm running against Andrew Clyde. People ask me why I'm doing this, and it's largely because of a sense of duty. Frankly, Mr. Clyde is an embarrassment to many of us. He's against almost everything that I'm for. I believe in good government. I think that the job of a representative is to represent the people efficiently and effectively. But you also have to do what you've sworn to do, which is to do your duty to preserve and protect our Constitution. I'm in favor of solutions. I don't believe in making excuses and pandering to hate. I don't believe in denying elections. And I don't believe in Jewish space lasers and nonsense like that. So at my old age, I practiced law for 46 years. I believe I bring a certain amount of education and experience, and I think I'd make a much better congressman than the current one. But basically, fundamentally, I believe in good government. I believe that we're supposed to do what we swear we're going to do. And I don't believe in pandering to hate and craziness. So that's where I am. I do feel a little bit underprepared. I have some minuscule Native American, I guess you'd call it blood in my veins, but not much. And I don't know a great deal about all of the problems that face Native Americans. I am familiar with a lot of them, but I'm certainly not familiar to the extent that I'm sure you folks are. So I will submit myself to your inquiries or whatever you wish to ask. I can't hear you.
All right. Well, again, thank you for joining us, because it's opportunities like these that allow us to have these conversations, which will hopefully bring some of the challenges unique to Indian country, to your mind and hopefully to your practice as a representative of the state of Georgia. But I'd like to first start off with a question related to the Indian Child Welfare Act. I'll give a little bit of background and then we'll jump into the question, okay?
Sure.
The Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted in 1978 in response to a crisis affecting American Indian and Alaska Native children, families, and tribes. Studies revealed that large numbers of Native children were being separated from their parents, extended families, and communities by state child welfare and private adoption agencies. In fact, research found that 25 to 35% of all Native children were being removed. Of these, 85% were being placed outside of the families and communities, even when fit and willing relatives were available. At the time, not only was ICWA vitally needed, but it was crafted to address some of the long-standing and egregious removal practices specifically targeting Native children. Among its added protections for Native children, ICWA requires caseworkers to make several considerations when handling an ICWA case, including providing active efforts to the family, identifying a placement that fits under the ICWA preference provisions, notifying the child's tribe and the child's parents of the child custody proceedings, and working actively to involve the child's tribe and the child's parents in the proceedings. Because these added protections address not only specific system abuses directed at Native children, but also their unique political status and cultural considerations, ICWA has been labeled as the gold standard of child welfare policy by experts in national leading child advocacy organizations far beyond Indian country. Now, right now, there is a case pending before the Supreme Court that will challenge the Indian Child Welfare Act. Should the unthinkable happen and ICWA is found to be invalid, it would have far-reaching consequences that will be felt for generations, namely weakening protections for Native children, thus clearing the way for bad actors to grow their control of Native land, Native industry, and Native futures. Would you consider introducing or co-sponsoring or supporting legislation that corrects what would be a grievous error by the Supreme Court?
Well, first let me say this. I am passingly familiar with the abominations and terrible things that happened to many of the Native American children of the past. There's no excuse for it, and of course we can't fix it. What we can try to do is to ensure that it doesn't continue to go forward. I don't feel like support is the right word. I would be enthusiastically in favor of and honored to help advance legislation that would be helpful if, as you say, the unthinkable happens. Given the current mix of the United States Supreme Court, I'm reminded of the old saw in Georgia about nothing is safe when the legislature's in session, and I'm starting to feel like nothing is safe when this Supreme Court sits. But let's hope that it doesn't come to that. But if it does, I would be honored to champion such a thing.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hello, I am Sandra Mitrovich. I work with the National Congress of American Indians. Thank you so much for joining us today for this forum. My question is going to be about the Help America Vote Act, also known as HAVA. The Help America Vote Act of 2002 was passed by the United States Congress to make sweeping reforms to the nation's voting process. HAVA addresses improvements to voting systems and voter access that were identified following the 2000 election. One of the provisions within the Help America Vote Act allows for the use of funds to be used to improve voter engagement. In the state of South Dakota, the Help America Vote Act is used to help counties pay for early in-person satellite offices and can be used for drop ballot boxes. If elected, would you support the funding of the Help America Vote Act?
Well, the short answer is yes, very much. The long answer is we have a bill in Georgia called SB 202, which has very much tried to disrupt what we consider to be freedom of access to the polls in Georgia. It seems to me, I recall that on some Indian lands and in certain places, voting has become difficult because folks don't necessarily have traditional addresses and things of that nature. My view is very simple. Everybody in the United States that's a citizen and qualified to vote should be entitled to vote. We should make that as easy as possible. I frankly cannot imagine why mail-in vote would be a problem. I cannot imagine why we don't allow everybody to register to vote on election day. So I guess what I'm saying to you is not only would I support what you're asking, but I think I would go a lot further, because it's time that we recognize in the United States of America that all of our citizens are actually equal and entitled to be treated that way.
Thank you for your response.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. I'm Erica. I work with Four Direction Native Vote, and I am from the Sac and Fox Nation in Oklahoma, here in Atlanta today to ask you a question regarding violence against Native women and all women. So I'll give you a little background and then the question. The Violence Against Women Act creates and supports comprehensive, cost-effective responses to domestic violence and stalking. It was enacted in 1994, but in 2022 was reauthorized and signed by President Biden this past March. The bipartisan VAWA reauthorization includes groundbreaking provisions to strengthen and modernize the law. The law provides survivors, the thousands of local programs that serve them, and communities with much-needed resources for housing, legal assistance, alternatives to criminal responses, and prevention programming. It also includes new economic justice provisions and bolsters access for survivors of all genders by strengthening non-discrimination laws and creating an LGBTQ services program. The law also restores tribal jurisdiction, allowing tribes to hold non-native perpetrators accountable, improves existing housing protections, and increases access to emergency and short-term housing, and creates dedicated investments in culturally specific service providers to ensure survivors of color are supported. Now, the impacts of COVID-19 have greatly impacted survivors and only exacerbated the existing inequalities in our society. Additional funding and resources are needed as Congress considers funding levels in its fiscal year 2023 appropriations legislation. So, my question to you is, do you believe that these life-saving services should be prioritized and federal funding used to address and prevent domestic violence, especially domestic violence against Indigenous and missing and murdered Indigenous women?
Well, again, the short answer is yes. The long answer is I'm aware that murdered and missing Native American women is an endemic problem, possibly pandemic. Violence against women has always been a problem in the United States. I believe it was 1919 we finally decided to give women the right to vote. We have to respect women's rights in every aspect. Violence against women is never an appropriate response to any situation. I don't know why we persist in having these problems when everybody knows that it's a problem that needs to be addressed. Certainly, federal funding can be very useful in this kind of situation. I think that violence against women is a problem nationally, not just related to Native American women, but it seems to be disproportional to Native American women. And we recently had the spectacle of the young woman from the military base that they didn't handle very well. And I think a lot of us are remembering that. So yes, I'm very much in favor of what you're talking about.
Thank you for your response, Mike, for being here and for supporting Indian country, Native youth, Native women, and Native voting rights. Thank you, Mike.
You're very welcome.
Yes, we'd like to give you a few minutes to share some parting words with there's a rich and diverse Native population here in Atlanta and throughout Georgia. So if you could please just spend a few minutes sharing a few thoughts with us as we close this discussion, we'd be grateful.
Well, again, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be here. I feel somewhat underprepared because I don't really have that much knowledge, detailed knowledge of Indian affairs. But let me say this. We live in a country that's diverse. We've come to the point at which now many would divide us as much as they possibly can. We have this insane white supremacist movement that seems to be taking place. That movement is destructive to everybody. To the extent that we can, we need to repudiate it. We need, wherever we can, always if we can, get rid of the stereotypes. We need to deal with people individually. There's no such thing as a non-American citizen. We're all citizens. It doesn't make any difference what race, color, creed, national origin, or anything else you can think of. We're all entitled to be here. Some tiny bit of my history would go all the way back to Native Americans, but almost everyone here, including the Native Americans, arguably, everybody here is an immigrant. The Native Americans supposedly came across the land bridge many, many years ago. If we're here, we have a right to be here. We have a right to have our rights respected. We're all entitled to freedom. We're all entitled to what the Declaration of Independence says. There's no justification for making a distinction based on anything at all. We're all here. We're all Americans, and we need to act like it, and we need to understand it. and we need to put people in Congress who understand it and who will do it. Frankly, we're in a little bit of danger today. It's entirely possible that crazy people could take over. But that's not going to happen, and the reason it's not going to happen is because good people like you and me and others are going to stand up, and we're going to stop it. So let me leave you with this. There's good news. It looks like people are starting to catch on. We had a situation in Kansas a while back when the result of the voting was a lot different than what people predicted. It showed that people were going to come out for women's rights. It showed that people were going to respect individual freedom and liberty. That gives me hope, and it should give you hope too. We can do this. All we need to do is to stick together and to do what's right. It's not hard. Everybody knows what's right. They really do. So thank you for having me. I'd like for you to vote for me if you can. I tease people that if you don't live in the right place, you could always move. But please do get out and vote this time. And no matter how complicated people make it for you, you go ahead and find your way to make your vote be cast and to be counted. And thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for joining us. You know, there's always time and opportunity to reach out to the many resources available here in Atlanta, in Georgia in general, to the organizations that are really on the front lines of advocating for Native issues. And we invite you to do so. I wouldn't worry about what you do or don't know. We can move forward together, and we definitely help you out in understanding some of those concerns. On behalf of Native American Rights Fund, NCAI, and Four Directions, we thank you for joining us, and good luck. Best wishes on your candidacy.
Thank you. Vote. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.